Well, I have that it's time. We'll go ahead and start, and people will probably keep walking, and that's all right. Let me introduce myself. My name is Cindy Wallace. I am a hospice chaplain with Alexian Brothers Hospice, which is a Catholic medical institution in Illinois, way up north, very far from here. But that's where I am. I've been there for 3 years. Before that, I was in Georgia for a while with my friend Kathy here at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta doing a residency, and before that I was a hospice chaplain with another hospice organization in Georgia. I've been in chaplaincy in some way, shape, or form for 10 years and ministry altogether for 24. What got me into chaplaincy, though, is a personal experience, and what got me kind of on the road to doing something like this for you guys is a very personal experience. When my father died about 11 years ago, that kind of shook up my whole life, and at that point I was in seminary and trying to figure out which way I wanted to go. And one of the things that I had to do in seminary was a CPO, is what they called it, clinical pastoral orientation. And I waited till the summer to do it so I wouldn't have as many weeks to have to go to the hospital and visit people. And that's just a joke, a big joke that God was laughing about, because I got in there and I loved it. So I went and did a whole extended residency for the next 9 months and was in the hospital every week. And now I'm doing that for a living. So God got the last laugh on that one. But what moved me in that direction was my own experience with grief and with loss with my father. And what kind of got me into the ministry project that I've been doing that I finished for my doctoral work was a question that many people have for me when I would go and visit them. They would say something like, why is it so hard for me to go back to church? Or they would say, one of the hardest things for me in this time of grief is to go back to church. And I heard that so much, and it really bothered me, because the church is supposed to be the place where you go for comfort, where you go to feel loved, where you go to feel welcome, where people are supposed to be around you and support you. But the comment that I got that really kind of got me into my doctoral project was the one that said, when a lady told me, when my father died, it was hard to go back to church because everyone there was happy. There was no place for my tears. And I've heard that more than once, and I actually had that experience myself, where people didn't quite know what to say, didn't quite know what to do. I felt out of place, they felt awkward and uncomfortable, and so with all of that, I felt like I had very little to no support, and I've had other people do that too. So I did this project where I interviewed a lot of people who actually had relationships with churches while their loved one was dying or while they experienced grief, and I kind of tried to find out, what was that experience like for them? Did they get support from their church? Where did they get support? How were they supported? What did all that look like? And what, if they could change anything, or if they could have asked for one thing from their church, what would they have asked for? And that's kind of where this session has come out of. It's come out of all of that research and that writing from that doctoral project to help you guys kind of get a vision for a ministry that most churches really stop within the first few weeks to month of a death. We're really good at the time of the funeral. We're really good at taking food, sending flowers, doing that kind of thing. And then we don't really know what to do after that. Some churches have things in place. Some churches know what to do, and some churches are working to try to get there. But I would say as a whole, the gap between what I do as a hospice chaplain in hospice with a full-out bereavement program that follows people for 13 months, where we do one-on-one sessions, where we send cards and mailings and phone calls, all of that kind of thing, where we are required to follow people for a length of time because their grief is still going. That has not progressed into a church setting. And I think it's sad because that's a huge ministry hole that we have. So my hope is to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, to give you guys some ideas about how you can best support people in your church, in your area of work, whether it's church or other ministry, how you can support them in their time of grief and loss. So we're going to start this with a very simple question that we ask each other all the time. I'm going to ask you, how are you? Great, fine, good. How many of you just lied to my face? Go ahead, confession's good for the soul. Raise your hand. How many of you just lied to great, fine, good? Come on, yeah. Not everybody's great, fine, and good, are they? But that's what we always say. Just for kicks, I've actually said something different every once in a while just to make the person a little uncomfortable because I think it's funny and I can. And so they'll say, how are you? I'm like, not really good today. And they almost stutter. They're like, I'm sorry. And I'm just inside, I'm giggling like a little girl because I think it's hysterical. They don't know what to do with that. The other part of me as a minister is saying, that is so sad that you don't know what to do with that. Because we're so used to saying, hey, how are you doing? Good to see you. We don't stop. We don't make eye contact. We don't listen at all. So when you hear something other than, great, fine, good, you have no idea what to do. Grief ministry, and I would say any ministry for that matter, starts with us caring enough to stop, look someone in the eye, ask, how are you, and wait to hear the answer. Any ministry, not just grief ministry, you have to care enough to ask the question and wait to hear the answer. How are you? I have a gift of hearing people's stories. This is good for my job. This is not so great for my family when we're out to eat, because I hear people's stories whether I ask for them or not. I don't know if it's the intonation. I don't know if I make eye contact for 2 seconds too long or whatever, but they know that I really mean it. And so then we're sitting in the restaurant for 30 extra minutes with my teenage boys behind me going, stop, knock it off, we want to go home. Or we're standing in the line at the grocery store and the cashier's telling me how her mother just died and she doesn't know what to do with her estate, and people are lining up behind me very angrily tapping. They're like, what are you doing? Check out already. I don't know what I do, but I know that there's something about making that eye contact with a person and really asking the question, instead of making that eye contact and then putting your head down immediately, because I can do that too. When I don't want to listen, I do that too. Hey, how are you? But I don't mean it. Don't tell me your life story. That is the point of ministry. That's where we start. So we're going to back up just a little bit, and I'm going to ask you this again. After we do just a little project, does everybody have a salmon and a gold piece of paper? I just like the word salmon. You can call it peach or whatever. You don't have salmon. We're out of salmon. Can anybody maybe share? If you could have one.
I got 2 of them.
Oh, great, wonderful. Okay. You can look on, and then you guys can, we can figure this out together. We're going to do a little project that is going to hopefully help you put some things in order and then see how that works out for you. What I want you to do is on that page, you should have blocks at the top, and I don't have mine up here either because we ran out of everything. Anyway, there should be, that's okay, there's 11 blocks at the top that say things like emotional stability, financial security, all of that. I want you to take just a few minutes and put those in order at the bottom there where you have 1 to 11 of the priority that they have in your life right now. Those 11 blocks. It doesn't matter if you write the whole word or not. This is just for you. There's not a test or a quiz later. I'm not going to take these back up. Just make little notes. 1 to 11. What's most important to you at 1 all the way down to 11. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a story to you. It's very uplifting. It's called The Dying Story. so you know it's not going to be a happy ending. So I just want to prepare you now. It's called the dying story. When you hear one of those things on your list in the story, I want you to cross that off. So you'll hear those 11 things in this story. When you hear them, cross them off your list, okay? The dying story. You have just celebrated your 47th birthday. Your husband, Bill, and your 2 kids, Jerry, age 23, and Nora, age 21, were home to celebrate. Everything was really nice and happy. Other family members and friends had come over in the evening for cake and coffee. Twice during the party, you had to leave because of a terrible coughing spell. It was worse than the spell you had in the store a month ago. You finally made the decision that you had been putting off since then. You said to yourself, Sarah, the first of the week, you need to make an appointment with the doctor. You could have pneumonia. Now, 2 weeks later, you've been to the doctor. She sent you for a series of tests and scans, and yesterday she told you that you have a tumor in your right lung. You need to go into the hospital so they can do a biopsy to find out if it's cancerous. Within a day, the report comes back, the tumor is cancer, and surgery is needed immediately. The doctor assures you that they will do everything they can, and she acts as if they will be able to get it all, but your emotional security is shaken. There's your first thing to cross off. Your emotional security is shaken. Surgery is over, and the doctors talk about it being successful. You find out it will take 6 to 8 weeks to recover, and the doctor feels you will need to begin radiation therapy right away. And maybe chemotherapy later. She says it's going to take a while. She says it's going to take a while, but she's hopeful. You wonder to yourself, what does that mean? You and Bill begin to talk about health insurance, the cost of these treatments, 30 radiation and then weekly chemotherapy. Bill's insurance covered the hospital bill, but doesn't pay as well for outpatient treatments. Nora is still in school, and you've been helping her with tuition. The house was just remortgaged, so you and Bill could make some much-needed renovations. Who would have thought that this kind of thing would have happened now? While you don't say anything to Bill, you're beginning to worry. Bill assures you that everything will work out and talks about you going back to work. You want to believe him, but you begin to get the feeling that you are no longer financially secure. It is now the 4th week of radiation. You haven't been able to eat and you're exhausted. You've lost 20 pounds since this whole thing began. As you glance in the mirror, you know you look like how you feel. Over the past few weeks, you and Bill have canceled out of the bowling team, and you've given up your plan for hosting a bridal shower for the neighbor's daughter. Bill asked about having Jane and Tom over, but you begged off, saying, I just don't feel up to it. I don't want our friends to feel sad for me. You know Bill is disappointed, but it's hard for you to make any effort to have a social life. So there's the next thing, social life. Radiation is completed and you're beginning your 3rd month of chemotherapy. At first you tolerated the drugs pretty well, but now it's really difficult. You wonder if the chemo is really helping, or are you just wasting money? Tomorrow you're going to go talk with your boss. Up to now he's been very understanding, but he really needs to know if you're coming back. You're the credit manager for a local appliance store. You've only worked there for 5 years, starting when the kids were in high school. It's really helped with the college tuition, and it's made you feel good, too, knowing that you are contributing to the household income. But the boss will need to hire someone new if you're not coming back. Your short-term disability ends this month, and you need to either return to work or apply for a long-term disability. You want to believe that after this course of chemotherapy, you'll be able to go back to work, but you're doubtful. You haven't been feeling well, barely able to keep anything down. Your clothes just hang on you. You've lost most of your hair. You don't have the energy or the money to do anything about the way you look. When you look in the mirror, it's a stranger you see. You remember the social worker at the clinic talking to you about body image. What body image, you say to yourself? I don't have any anymore. Being realistic, you know that when you see your boss tomorrow, you will resign your job. So there's 2 in that one. This course of chemo ends and you have another series of x-rays and scans. The news isn't good. The cancer has spread into the left lung. Bill has now taken a second job to help pay for medical bills. The kids are over a lot and you worry about what this is doing to them. In the past 6 months, your life and your family's has turned upside down. More and more you feel at odds with yourself. You feel as if you're watching things happen, but you're not really involved. Nora brings over books, tapes, needlework, all the things you like to do, but you don't have the energy or interest. You try, but you really can't even pretend to be interested. The stuff piles up in a corner. Nora doesn't ask anymore if you like the needlework pattern or the latest novel. You've lost all interest in hobbies. Friends have been faithful throughout your illness. The neighbors have helped out as they can, mowing the lawn in the summer, and they've promised to shovel the walks this winter if Bill's too busy and if you're not up to it. Other friends have sent cards and flowers. They've brought over whole meals. They don't seem to come as often as they did at first, though, but you're not upset by this. It's almost a relief not having to face them and make conversation. You realize that you've really withdrawn from all your friends. 8 months have now passed. The doctors have finally said what you've been thinking for quite a while, that there's nothing more that can be done. Your physical condition has been steadily worsening, and now you spend most of your time in bed because you really can't get up and get around on your own anymore. You're always having to call someone to help, and you really don't like having to do that. It's hard to lose your independence and your own mobility. Something dark seems to be filling you. For the past months, in spite of everything you've coped, you and Bill have even laughed about the bills piling up and about having to apply for bankruptcy. But now you feel different. You feel a deep sense of loss. In the beginning of all of this, you were confused and angry, wondering why God has let this happen. That was followed by some acknowledgement that it had happened and hoped that you might get better. But now that hope is gone, and it's been replaced with a feeling of impending doom or emptiness. You have no sense of God's presence or care or comfort, only a deep fear. As you let thoughts of dying drift into your mind and heart, God seems very far and distant. Your sense of spiritual well-being seems to be slipping away. In the days and weeks that follow, you find yourself watching your family, their movements, their comings and goings. Bill comes in and sits by the side of your bed. He looks weary and worried, and you see the grief in his eyes. The kids take turns staying overnight, and they have that same look in their eyes. You want to comfort them, but talking is such an effort. And besides, what words could you use? You feel that you no longer share in their lives, that you have nothing to say. It's all been said. Occasionally, you will hold a hand, but really, you no longer communicate verbally with others. Sometimes as the family is around, you have a sense of drifting away. You watch them as though you were an observer. You hear them talking in the kitchen, but you no longer strain to hear what they're saying. You begin to let Jerry and Nora and Bill, your family, slip away. Within the next few weeks, your condition worsens. There's now a nurse and other people in your house. They are with the family most of the time, but they come in to see you too. Even though there's nothing you want, it's just nice to have someone sit by your bed. You're especially glad when Bill comes home from work because he sits by your bed and holds your hand. That's really the last thing you remember. You drift in and out of a coma for a few days. You're calm and restful. Your family agrees that you seem comfortable. Early one Sunday morning, about 9 months after you were first diagnosed, you die. So I'd like to go back to my first question. How are you? Different answer this time? I expect so. The first time I did that activity, there were just a few of us, and the person read the story, and she had another person who would go around the table, and when you got to that part of the story, you had to pick up your card and hand it to her, and she would take it. When we got to communicate verbally, I thought the woman was going to have to attack me to get the card out of my hand. It was just a card. There was nothing wrong with me physically, but just the thought of losing that piece of me. It was a struggle to just hand it to her. So I did this activity with you, hoping to give you just an inkling, just a little inkling of what someone and their family experience as they go through the process of dying and loss. I also did this activity to help you see that grief does not start when someone dies, does it? The grief started probably when I told you the name of the story was the dying story. That's when your grief started, right? Because you knew what was coming. Grief begins at the possibility of loss. Just the possibility of loss. The first time the woman finds a tumor, a lump in her breast, that possibility that I have to make an appointment, that this shouldn't be there, that what's my family going to do? How is this going to turn out? That moment is when she starts grieving. You know, I have a 14-year-old who'll start 9th grade this year. Yes, thank you. I need that. She said, bless you. I appreciate that from all of you. When he started 8th grade, we got a letter, September, I think, saying the first time they will meet with their high school counselor will be January, blah, blah, blah. You will need to go on the website and start looking for his courses so that they will be approved by January the 16th. I was like, get out of my face! He just started 8th grade. I'm not ready for this. What are you doing? My grief started long before that letter came, honestly, but it made it more real that I have 4.5 more years left with my child in my home. You know, that's a loss. My husband said he's been telling me since our oldest was born, when he was born, he said just 18 more years in our house. Why would you do that? Why would you say that to me? He said, because I don't want you on the hood of the car screaming, not my baby, too soon, when he leaves for college. So he's been trying to help with that. Grief begins at the possibility of loss. I say that to you to say this. If you are not, or someone in your church is not building a relationship right now, with the people in their congregation, then you will probably not be welcome or even asked to be at the bedside when their loved one dies. That is a privilege and an honor. It is holy space. And if you have no relationship with them to begin with, when things are going absolutely fine and okay, do not expect them to call you in the worst moment of their life, because you're not welcome there. You know who they want? 1 or 2 people that have been with them through everything. That's who they want. When they pick up their phone to call somebody, it's the person that they're closest to. And if you haven't been there from over here, from the get-go, you're probably not going to be the person that they call at the end. So grief ministry begins long before there's even a possibility of loss. Grief begins at the possibility of loss. Grief ministry begins even before that, in building the relationships that you have to build to get to know your folks so that they trust you and they welcome you into their intimate space of hurt and pain and vulnerability. Okay? So I want you to understand the process. The other reason that we did this story is because grief ministry has to also start with people who understand their own grief. So think about that story. Think about the parts of that story that for you were hard to scratch off your list, that you maybe didn't scratch off your list because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to scratch that off my list right now because I don't want to think about it. Or the things that you didn't want to scratch off your list. Think about how that made you feel, or the memories that it brought up for you. Think about those things, because that's part of your own grief and your own loss and your own emotions. And if you have not dealt with your own grief and loss and emotions, then you cannot help somebody else. There are a lot of people who try to go and be ministers to people who have not dealt with their own stuff. When you do that, usually, you do it out of a good heart, but what usually ends up happening is that you go into these places and you end up helping yourself more than helping the person has the real hurt, the real pain at that time. Because you go into those places, your emotions get brought up, your loss gets brought up, your grief gets brought up, and either you stay way too long, you say way too much, and you don't leave when you need to, when they're ready for you to, because you need it, or you turn tail and run the other way. Let me give you an example from my project. Yeah, here it is. That gold sheet that you have, what people say about church support, there's some doozies on here. Here's someone who had not dealt with his own grief before going to minister to someone else. So this woman was caring for her mother at home. She'd been on hospice for 14 months with metastatic breast cancer, and she called her mother's pastor to come and visit her because she was dealing with some spiritual issues. So she said to the pastor, "Would you mind sitting with her for just a minute while I go upstairs?" The pastor says, "Oh, please don't leave me with her." The pastor said, "Oh, please don't leave me with her." She said, "I thought, wow, you're really helpful." She said, "Okay, I won't." There's a person who has not dealt with some of his own issues. And I say that to say, if you are uncomfortable in any way, or if you have people who are uncomfortable in any way with visiting folks who are, either homebound or sick or dying or grieving, first of all, don't put them out there to visit those people. Second of all, I encourage you to encourage them or yourself if you have some of these issues. Find a counselor or a trusted friend you can talk to, because you can't do ministry well if you don't take care of yourself first. You just can't. When we do not take care of ourselves, we do not do justice to the people that we try to care for. We don't minister well. Okay, so I say that to say, don't put them out there in the first place, because they're not the people that need to be doing that. And help them to help themselves. Mom got him back, though, really. She said, "Okay, I won't." And so she woke her mom up and said, "Mom, your minister's here." And the mother says, "Well, I'm glad he decided to show up. He didn't even go see so-and-so when she was sick." And he's standing right there. So I was like, that's what you needed to hear, because that's the truth. And sadly, that is the truth of a lot of people in ministry, because they don't deal with their own stuff. They don't like getting in uncomfortable positions. I had a pastor tell me once that he always looked so golden to the families, because he would show up bright and early the morning that they were going in for surgery. If they had to be there at 5:30, he was there at 5:20 to meet them. And they thought he was so kind to be there. What he said to me was, "I go that early so I can pray with them before they have to go back, because I'm there for less time than if I go later." Now, he looked great. He was there at 5:30 in the morning, but he only had to stay for 10 minutes, and that's why he did it, because he was so uncomfortable with being in the room. So I say that to say there's some stuff that we have to work on before we're able to help other people. So having said that, and having read the dying story, what I would like to talk to you about too, let me say this, is one thing is a phrase that my CPE supervisor shared with me. It was called detached compassion. So when you go to visit someone, you have to practice detached compassion, which sounds hard and cold, but what it really means is this. I can walk in the room with another woman whose father is dying, and I can be there with her in that moment. I can be support and comfort to her without feeling as sad as she does. Because while this is very sad and I am very empathetic to her situation, that is not my father. And I'm not going to take that sadness on as though it's my grief and my sadness. Detached compassion. That is how I stay in my job. Because if I was not able to do that, I would not be able to do my job. I wouldn't be able to stay in my job, that's for sure. Detached compassion. You can feel that sadness for them and help them through it without seeing it as your husband or your child or your father or whatever, as your experience. This is not your experience of grief, this is theirs. So, take care of yourself so that you don't take that on. Because if you don't take care of yourself, sometimes you can't control that. You just take that on and you start crying with them, and then when you go home, that sticks on you like glue and you can't shake it. Because you've just taken on their grief like it's your own. That's when you get burnout. That's when you can't let it go. When you're not taking care of yourself and you don't realize that that's not yours to take, that's theirs, and you can support them, but when you leave that place, you leave it there. It's not yours. Detached compassion. That's how you stay in your job. That's how you do ministry, and you're able to continue to do ministry. So, we said grief ministry grief starts before someone dies. What I'd like to talk about is kind of what that looks like. We talked about that we need it. We talked about why we need it. But what does that look like? And I'm sorry to say there's really not one source that I could point you to and say, go buy this book and do that. I really wish I could. But there's really not one source that I can do. There's plenty of different resources out there. Some of them for groups, for particular group workshops, or some for basics of grief. But there's not one that kind of pulls it all together and has training for your leaders and has all of this. So I would encourage you to get to know the counselors, the social workers, the chaplains in your area that maybe work with hospice or with funeral homes or whatever. Bring them in to help train your folks that may be interested in a ministry like this, and then see what works for you. So the first thing that I would tell you is to listen. Very simple, right? To listen. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Why? Yes. You guys are on top of it, so you can listen twice as much as you speak. So, do not try to fill the empty space with words like, oh, it was God's will. Or, oh, God needed them more than you did. Or, here are some doozies. You're young, you can have more children. Or, you're young, you can get remarried. Or, you had them for so long, isn't that such a blessing? Well, not right now, it's not. I'm sure maybe in a few months I may look back and be able to say it's a blessing that I had them for that long, but right now I feel like somebody punched me in my gut. Don't say those things. Don't say those things. Words really are pretty meaningless for people in this time. But we're in ministry, and what do we like to do? We like to fix things, because that's why we're in ministry, right? Things don't go well. We want to make them better. In this situation, you can't make this better. There's no better. They had someone die. That is their reality. That person is gone and will always be gone physically from their lives. You can't make that better. You can't fix that. Don't even try. So listen, and the second step to that is to be present. Be present and still. Because when we like to fix things, we usually are not good at being still. I'm not really good at being still. It's taken me a long time and a lot of work and a lot of prayer on my part to be able to do that. But that is not my nature. I'm a get up and go and do and be in charge of something, and let's do a project, and let's clean this, and let's do that. I like to do things. It makes me feel good. But when you're with someone like this, there's nothing you can do. And all your flitting around is just going to make them nervous, more than likely. Sit, be still, and listen. We go back to our question, how are you? Eye contact, stop, listen, be still with them. Because they need to talk. They need to tell you their story. They need to go back through whatever they've gone through, and they need to do that a lot, not just one time. So usually what I hear from my end of it is, I don't have anybody I can talk to. Nobody wants to hear about it anymore. Nobody even wants me to say their name. I had a mother whose son died in a car accident. She said she went back to church and no one would say their name. No one would say his name. People in her family wouldn't even say his name. And she said, what I started doing was saying his name. She said, and you could see them try to get out of the conversation with me. They got uncomfortable, they got uneasy, and they just walked away eventually because it made them so uncomfortable just saying their name. You cannot ignore it. That person existed, and when you don't say that name, it makes the people grieving feel like you don't want them to exist anymore. You want to pretend like they were never here, they were never a part of anything. Usually when we do things like that, we're trying to be nice. We're trying to, if I don't talk about it, it will make them feel better. I go back to my other statement, you're not going to make them feel better. It is sad. It will be sad. They will get through it, but you cannot make that better. Just because you don't say their name does not mean that they don't think about them. Oh, I didn't say his name. She didn't think at all about him today. No. Does not work like that. Say their name. Just a little thing like that. But that's what people experience when they come back to church for the first time. They experience people trying to ignore things. So be present. Don't ignore it. Another thing that I would encourage is to actually, instead of ignoring it, do just the opposite. Bring it up. Maybe not, I'm so sorry that your husband was killed in a tragic accident. I mean, choose your words wisely, right? But bring it up. And I don't just mean on a one-to-one level. Look at what you're singing. Look at what you're studying as far as Bible studies. Talk to your pastor about doing a sermon, about grief, and about the things that people experience when they lose their loved ones, or when they have experienced some sort of loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one or something else, a loss of a job, loss of independence. Through our story, that person experienced a lot of different losses along with her family. It wasn't just the death at the end. Talk about those things and make them normal to talk about. Let them know it's okay to feel the things they feel. So, what are some of the things? You tell me, what are some of the theological issues or feelings that come up when people are experiencing grief that you could talk about in church?
Anger at God.
Anger at God. Anybody heard any sermons on being angry lately? Anybody?
Punishment.
Punishment. Why did this happen?
Injustice.
Is it a punishment? Injustice? It's not fair. Why me?
Guilt.
Guilt. That's an excellent one. That is an excellent one. I don't think people realize the guilt that comes after any kind of death, but depending on the circumstances, it's, I should have done this, I should have done that. We should have seen this coming.
Sadness.
Sadness. Absolutely. Absolutely. We do a lot of preaching about hope and about repentance and about things like that. But did you know that more than half of the Psalms in the Old Testament are laments? People crying out to God. Not just crying out, God help me, but crying out, God, you did this to me. You put me in this situation. This is your fault. Even Adam, go back to the very beginning. God, you gave me this woman. It was her fault. You gave her to me and something's wrong with her. That's all I know. Your fault. Not mine.
Somebody needs to write some lament choruses
Thank you.
instead of just praise choruses.
Thank you. I think so too. I wish I was talented enough to do that. Because I would. Psalm 88. Psalm 88 is an individual lament. It's the only lament in the Bible, that in the book of Psalms, that does not end with a word of hope. Most laments end with "Praise be to God," or God will help us," or "God is faithful," something to that effect. Psalm 88 ends with "darkness. All of my friends have left me, and the only friend that I have is darkness." And I think that needs to be said from the pulpit. Because there are times in our life when the only thing you feel like you have left is darkness, and you're not ready to say praise be to God. You're just not ready. And that's okay. That's okay.
One of my seminary professors said that the only hope in that psalm is that it's being hopefully said to God.
It is. The hope in that psalm is that it is being said to God. You know, when you feel like there's nothing else, God is still there. God is still there. Let me read this for you. This was the husband of the wife that I think is the next one. I'll give you both of them. This couple that I interviewed, their 21-year-old daughter was carjacked and raped and murdered. And this interview was 20 years afterwards. But what he said the night that he found out that she was killed, and he said this, he said, "It was before I got home on that trip home when I knew that my daughter was dead, and I'm having this conversation with God, and I'm saying, either faith, this journey that I've been on, either it's been real now or I can't make it." I mean, there was the possibility of despair, and I had, in the midst of grief, I had this assurance, it's real, I'm here. I think Paul said it well, there is grief, but there is grief with hope. We focus so much on hope of heaven that it will all be better in the end, that person is in a better place. But I got to tell you, when my dad died, that didn't do much for me. It honestly did not do much for me. It does now. I'm 11 years out. It does now. But in that time of grief, when every person that came through that funeral line and shook our hand and said, "He's in a better place," my sister said, "The next person that says that, I'm going to punch them in the gut." It's like, let's go get some coffee. Get her out of the lineup. Because it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. What helped me was that God showed up. God showed up. One-on-one with me, God was there. In certain people, God was there. Christ's presence was there with me through them. Knowing that He was in heaven, that just made me angry, quite honestly, at the beginning. Made me angry. Yeah, well, I'm here, so what good is that? That was my response. So where are they going to find hope? If we find hope in the presence of God, then we need to be the presence of God, right? We need to show them the presence of God. We need to be the hands and feet of God, because that's where hope is. We need to help them through. We don't have the answers. Let me make this very clear. We don't have the answers to the why questions. We don't. There is no good answer for those questions. What we have is the ability to let people know it's okay to ask the questions. God is big enough to handle the questions. God is big enough to take your angry fit and still be there and still wrap His arms around you and still love you. They can feel that best when we are there wrapping our arms around them and loving them. We have to be the presence of God. Now, there is the hope of heaven that does weigh in, obviously, for Christians. And I love what his wife said. She said, "When I get to heaven, I want to see Jesus, but I want my daughter to take me to Him." You know, absolutely. I want to see my dad. You know, when I'm on my deathbed, I know I will see my Father. And He will greet me and take me into the arms of God. I know that. I have no doubt of that. And there's days when you can't wait to see that again, but I love my life here too. and I have to get through each day here. So while I hope that day is a really, really, really long way off, quite honestly, I do still have that hope. It just doesn't always help me get through the days here. You need something more. So practical application, what does that look like? We have these questions, we have these things that we can do from the pulpit or Bible studies. What do hands and feet look like? Why do you think it's hard for people to go back to church?
That's where they had a relationship with the one who was lost.
That's where they had a relationship. That's right.
You want to show emotion.
They don't want to show emotion. Absolutely.
It's an entire group of people who don't know what to say and don't know what to do. And when you're talking about 100 people who will come up and tell you you're, better place. And I mean, that's a lot to go through.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the place where they last saw the body.
That's right. Sometimes it's the place where they have the funeral. So knowing this, one of the things that was hard for my mother, and I've heard so many other people say this too, is for 40 years, she and my father sat on the third row, left side, by the piano. My dad dies suddenly, just out of nowhere, has a heart attack. We go back to church Sunday. Where do we sit? Who do we sit with? Because if we go try to sit on that row, you might as well have a gigantic black hole there sucking up the space around it, because that's what it feels like. It'll suck the life right out of you if you try to sit on that bench. There's no way. That's not going to happen. Where do you go? Who do you sit with? How do you exit if you start to cry? Because you probably will. Because inevitably somebody didn't look at the hymns being selected, and one of them was what had been played at the funeral. Inevitably. Or was their favorite one? Think ahead, by the way. If you have a music minister and you were at the funeral, give them a heads up and change it. Change it and tell them not to use it for the next few weeks or month. Give them some time to heal before they have to hear that again. Because it's going to bring them right back. Right back. Right back. So inevitably there's going to be tears. What am I going to do? I don't want to cry in front of people. So I want to slip out. Where can I sit where I can slip out easily? Where can I sit if I just want to slip in without anybody noticing me, so nobody speaks to me and starts hugging me? Because as soon, if you're trying not to cry and somebody hugs you, what do? You cry. That is the worst, If I'm tearing up and somebody comes like this, I'm like, don't touch me, don't touch me. That's what, don't touch me, I can't handle it. And I walk away because I don't want to cry, I don't want to cry. But that's what happens. You want to hug, you want to cry. How about you cry with them?
Yeah. I think it's better to cry.
Exactly.
And people just learn, well, it's okay, she'll get over it.
Yeah.
Some cries.
I have a beautiful, beautiful quote. This is the kind of church we want to be. The church was with us the whole time through the whole thing. They brought food just about twice a week, 3 times before she died. And after she died, they brought food. They cried like we did. They stayed right beside us, side by side, hugged our neck. They grieved with us, I guess is what you'd say. As small as that church is, everybody has a part to play and everybody has a role to play. And if that person is not there, something is missed out of that church and out of that service. So we were basically a big family. A+. They got it right. They were there before. They cried with them before. They knew what was coming. They didn't leave their side. And they stayed with them after. And when they met them for the first time that Sunday after that their mother died, they hugged them and they cried with them. He says in another quote, we had a really long service that first Sunday because everybody just stayed and hugged and cried and talked. That's beautiful. That's community. That's community. That's what we want. But our instinct is to ignore, build walls, stand back, don't make them cry, don't do anything that would make them cry or show emotion, and sing happy stuff. That's what we tend to do. So allow them to leave early. Really have a conversation with the music minister. these songs are going to be difficult for that family and they're going to be here Sunday. Can we not sing them?
It sounds to me like you're saying contradictory things at that point. And so I'm wanting to double check with you to see what.
About letting them cry and then avoiding the songs?
Yeah, where you settle on that. Because it sounds to me like you're saying that it is helpful for a person to be able to be in the worshiping body and to be received by those who had grieved with them as the death was coming or as the grief loss was coming.
Yes.
And it's also helpful for them to be with you after the service is over and you meet together. They hug your neck, here's your phrase. Well, but then you're also talking about, well, telling the music minister not to use certain hymns. Having an escape route to get out if you need to cry. Can you clarify? Or
Yes, I can. Usually when I was talking about the escape route, I like the way you said that, the escape route, that's usually what's going on in the person's mind. Where can I get out so that if I need to leave early, I can? And if they need to leave early, don't everybody turn and look at once and say, what are they doing? Or don't everybody go run after them and follow them. Let them do what they need to do. The thing with the music is, it hurts enough. You don't have to dig a knife deeper. Especially in the first month, I would say, it's going to hurt enough just to walk through the doors. So if you can avoid just those little bitty things like that, then it might help them to stay connected into the church. If they come in and they hear something that is very meaningful and very painful at the same time, they will leave. They will leave, and it will be harder to get them back in the second time.
So in your scenario, in your expectation, would it be possible that if this were a church that were accepting of and able to walk with this grieving person, that the person might weep when they're singing these songs, and that they might stay in the congregational worship experience and just go on that way.
They may.
It's a very individual thing, too.
Sure.
There's a woman in our church that she was not going to shed a tear in front of anybody.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. And it was really hard for her to come and stay for a whole service. And she did leave quite often, but she did keep coming back. And her expression of grief needed to be a one-on-one, not in front of everybody,
Right.
sort of talking, and she wasn't the kind of person who wanted lots of big hugs, you know what I'm saying? So it was kind of trying to follow, knowing who she is, follow her lead for the way that she felt comfortable expressing her grief.
And knowing to do that, that's what I would say. Knowing enough to know to follow her lead, to know that it is individual and unique. Because some people just, if you're just a hugger, you may not think about what that's going to do to somebody else, or even if they want it. I had a hugger pin my husband up against a wall one time to get him. He's not a hugger. He needs a nice space around him usually. And she just, and just pinned him and hugged him whether he wanted to be hugged or not.
This is part of having that relationship with this person when the grief starts.
Yes.
You don't start having a relationship with the person when they get in the hospital.
Right. In the back.
Actually, a church that I worked with is, they were developing a grief ministry team. And what they did is they pulled people from the church who had gone through losses. So they had a couple who had lost a child. They had a lady who lost a sister. They had a gentleman who lost his mother. And they kind of put this team together. And it was amazing because what they did, and again, once the possibility of grief happened, somebody from that team was almost assigned to that family. And they were there through that process, and they got to know them, to get to know their individual needs and who they were, and they kind of became the point for the church to say, okay, you know what, they're going to come on this Sunday. And that person would meet them at the door, if it was a recent widow. they meet them at the door, it's like, let's walk in together, and let's try sitting here, to kind of guide them that. And they, if they need to get up and leave, they would, because they knew they would know, do I go up with her, or do I, does she need this time alone? They got to have those conversations with the Sunday school class. That's a Sunday school class she and her husband had been in for 40 years. Do you want to try a different one? So one of the ladies ended up going to the youth class for 2 weeks and teaching youth Sunday school, just because she needed that change. But by having that team and putting those things in place, and the rest of the church knew too, they got to learn, that the one couple needed the support, and that, so they actually almost did like a reception the first 20 minutes of church service instead of the children's sermon that day. So they really, each thing was individual, but because they had this team that had been through this experience, it was wonderful to get to see them individualize it and work as a team.
I think that's what we should do really with all our volunteers. Not that any of us have hundreds of volunteers knocking down the door to say, please let me do something. I know that's always an issue in every church and every ministry that you go to, but if you could find people with that skill set who've been on that road and train them, then they are going to be really your best folks to be able to walk with these people on that journey. It's also very important for the people in grief to have someone who's walked on that journey. One of the ladies said, I'm going to read her quote because it's better than what I can say. It says, I really do not have one friend who's lost their spouse. They have tried, talking about our church, they've tried to meet my needs, and I feel like they've done the best they can. But until you've walked in this person's shoes, you don't know. So it's not that people have not been there for me, they have. But until you can really cry with somebody, you've got to talk to other people who've been through this, because that helps you. The other part of that I would say, though, just a caution, is to make sure that when someone is saying, I want to be a part of this, I want to be a part of this, that they are far enough away from their own loss. I suggest 1 to 2 years, because you go back to the scenario that we talked about in the beginning, where they're going to try to minister to people and they haven't fully let themselves grieve, and they haven't fully worked through their own grief. In hospice, we have people who, right after their loved ones die, sometimes they want to start to be a volunteer. We always put them through the training and put them in the office. You can do office work until you have gotten through this, because they don't realize. Sometimes they're in shock, sometimes they're still numb, and they don't realize, sometimes for months, sometimes even for the first year, how hard it's going to be. And so, make sure that if you do, utilize people like that, absolutely utilize them, but make sure that they're on the other side of their intense grief process. The other part of that I will say, the other thing that I will say about this is, don't assume that because people have a large family or because people have a really good Sunday school group that they're going to be well supported. Because death, dying, any kind of really huge stress like that can really mess up a family system. Everybody in that family has a role to play. And when you take one person out of it, it's going to make that family kind of come apart for a little bit until they're able to reconfigure how to communicate with one another and how to get through this crisis with this new formation of family members without that one person. When my dad died, I did not realize how much of a buffer he was between me and my mother. So I would tell him things, because I was a daddy's girl, I would tell him things first. Unbeknownst to me, he would slip pieces of information to my mother about whatever I had talked to him about, so that when I called my mother, she already had an idea of what was coming and we could have a good conversation. Daddy dies. The first time I called my mother to talk to her about whatever I would normally talk to Daddy about, huge explosion. I thought, what just happened here? Why aren't you? Daddy understood this and you were always okay with it too. What just happened? It took me a little while to figure out that he was my buffer. He knew how to talk to her in a way that I didn't, and he helped our relationship. So we had to relearn each other. We had to relearn our communication. We had to relearn who we were to each other without my dad physically present. It was a whole new way of being together. That happens, and people grieve differently. People handle stress differently. People talk to each other in different ways. So the person that you think, oh, they've got a great family support system, you don't know that. You just don't know that.
Listen to you, one thing, I'm a preacher, and one of the things we do a grief class a couple of times a year. Sounds like we probably need to do a church-wide Wednesday night, month-long
Absolutely.
thing about what to do in grief, so people can, so everybody, not just grieving people, can get it.
Yes,
But it
absolutely.
also sounds, listening to us talk, that the church needs, that in this thing of grief, church members need to be cutting each other some slack. You know, I really wish the minister of music had to take that hymn, but he's not going to hell for that.
No.
And I know it hurt that family's feelings, and I'm sorry about that. But there's worse stuff that's happened. I had recently left a church and had to go back to do a funeral, and the church secretary, who was excessively stupid, put in the same bulletin, sympathy to the family of da-da-da-da-da, and happy birthday to da-da-da-da-da to the woman, in the same bulletin. And the family was just livid.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get that, I know, the woman was dumb, and real bad mistake. But church members make real bad mistakes. And if you've been through some of this stuff with the church, maybe they can learn in advance to cut each other some slack all the time.
Exactly.
I just was wondering, it sounds like you've done a lot of research. You said you did it for a doctorate. So do you have a book? If not, when's it coming out? Because I just walked through one of the big book displays. Maybe it was the Smith and Hillway's shop. And there was a table with books about grief. And from the titles, there's not a single one that I, as a chaplain, would buy and read. Because it was like, I know you have a grief, get over it. Or, I mean, like, I just refuse to. Maybe the titles are all wrong, and I should have opened it up and looked at the table of contents or something like that, but it's just like, no, that is so against anything that
Well, and
I want to use.
that goes back to what I said, there's really not a good resource, like a workbook or a, good training manual or anything like
For
that.
churches.
For churches, no. Everything that I have has been geared to hospice, or it's geared to, medical professionals. So part of my project was to hope to bridge that gap. And yes, I am going to be working on trying to put something together so that there is something that helps to bridge that gap a little bit more.
Because our church wants to do like his church.
Yeah.
We're already thinking, how do we help one another companion people well
Yes.
in grief, all kinds of grief.
Yes.
I personally, not only am a chaplain and a medical professional, I've gone through and experienced grief, multiple griefs. Within an 18-month period, I lost 5 immediate members of my family. And that was very difficult to handle. I found out I grieved differently for each person. When people talk to grief about me, I didn't realize that. People don't even begin to realize that each person, you're going to grieve differently. And it has just taken me until now, and that's been 5 years ago since the last one, to even begin to be able to talk and deal with grief. And a lot of people came to me and said the same class, who even had people tell me it's time for you to move on, get over it. And grief comes in your own time, in your own way, and you have to figure that out. And I think I wanted somebody to just stand with me and walk through the process with me. And I too have searched for resources, both in the religious world and the medical world. And I haven't found anything that really, I found bits and pieces here and there.
Exactly.
But nothing really that I, as a grieving person, could take and try to walk through to.
The other part of that, what I'd like to say on the other side of that too, is that grief doesn't go away. You don't get over grief. grief stays with you throughout your whole life because that person doesn't come back. It's not like in a year or two I'll be better. No, in a year or two you'll be different. You'll be different. The grief will be different. Hopefully it won't be as intense as it was when that person first died, but it will still be there. I still miss my dad. I will always miss my dad. That will always be a part of my life. It's not going to go away. You know, that's just a part of reality. So grief doesn't go away is the first thing that just to emphasize there, which is why I say, in hospice we do 13-month bereavement, and we do all kinds of different things with that. I would suggest in your ministries that you don't just do something like we do the funeral part really well, the funeral food really well, maybe even a couple of weeks out. You need to check on these folks throughout the whole year because you've got holidays, you've got birthdays, you've got anniversaries, they may have weddings and new babies and who knows what kind of special occasions, and then the anniversary of the death all over again. Those are times when people need someone to call or need someone just to go to lunch with and just to vent a little bit, because those are difficult. Even if they're happy occasions, if they're a baby being born, it's still hard because that other person is not there to experience that. Or with the parents, they said every time a baby's born into their family, it just reminds them that their daughter's not there to have children. She never got to have children. Or every wedding they go to is a reminder to him that he didn't get to walk her down the aisle. You know, they're happy occasions. Christmas is a happy occasion, but it's one of the hardest things for people to go through. The first year, especially first 2-3 years of grief, those are some of the hardest times. So those are the things that we need to remember and not forget our folks on. Do some grief services or a special event, do some workshops, we do a grief during the holidays workshop before Thanksgiving every year to kind of help give people some coping strategies to get through that event. Send them a card, not anything big or expensive. Send them a card on their birthdays. Just let them know you're thinking about them. Because they're not going to get that other person to call them on their birthday. That's one person they're not going to talk to on those occasions. Just send them a card or a phone call. Little things. Little things mean a lot to someone when they're hurting.
I had a very loving minister say to me one time after the death of a child that you don't get over grief, you learn to live around it.
Yeah, you do. You do. You learn to live around it and you learn to live through it. You learn how to work
But it's
through
still
it.
a part of your life.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. Let me get to one other thing. I did want to share one other thing, kind of a reason. We kind of talked around just about everything that I have on this. Had to talk to either you said it or I did, so you guys are great. The other thing that I would say is to be available and for you to take the first step. Because how many times do people say, call me if you need anything? You don't want to call.
That's useless words, in my opinion.
Exactly, useless words. Call me if you need anything. They don't want to pick up the phone and let you know that they need anything. So think ahead. What might they need? Some of the things that some people have said are, just somebody to go to lunch with, or somebody to, if they don't feel like getting out of the house, maybe just call and see if they need something from the grocery store. Let them know you're thinking about them. Or, maybe they don't feel like cooking dinner. Take them out to dinner. Just give them a call. Don't wait for them to call you because that probably won't happen. It may, but it probably won't. And the other thing that I would say is that remember that when you do grief ministry, you're only helping yourself. Because if you dare to love just a little bit, you're going to lose. You're going to experience loss. You're going to grieve. Everyone will at some point in time in their life. Maybe you've only had, maybe someone who you were not very close to that died and it hasn't hit home as much as it will later in your life. Or maybe you've lost a lot of people already and you know what that journey's like. We will all experience that because we dare to love someone. We will all experience that. So this is a ministry not just for your church, it's a ministry for yourself as well, for anyone, for the community, anybody that you come in contact with. I like what Diane Ackerman says. She says this is a slender thread is the work that this came out of. It says, you don't have to be larger than life to help people in the darkest moments of their lives, but it does require that we listen athletically, I like that, with one's whole attention, and it is physically exhausting. It feels like a contact sport. We will inevitably make mistakes, but it's more important to reach out and make a mistake than not to reach out at all. So reach out because it's a need that everyone has.
Are you familiar with Stephen Ministries?
Yes, I am. I had someone in the other session that mentioned Stephen Ministry.
It's pretty much some of the same things you were talking about, but it's a very concentrated, but we just beginning it in our church, and we have, it's a 3-month, once a week study, very intense, and it deals with all, just everything, of course, that you said, but it's very, very good.
Yeah.
And when you do it, you commit to 2 years. Like when you get through the training and you have a care receiver, you call the caregiver, you have a care receiver. You commit to meet with them once a week or call them on the phone and check on them. Depends, of course, on what their grief, where their grief is.
But you're building that relationship.
But it's a wonderful program. It's in quite a number of churches.
It is. It's in a number of Methodist churches as well, and it's kind of creeping into Baptist life too. That's a good thing. Yeah, it sure is. Yeah.
St. Louis, I believe.
I think you're right.
Are you familiar with the Grief Share Ministry?
I have not been a part of the grief share ministry, but I am familiar with it. I know the same folks that put out divorce care put out grief share, and it does. I don't have any experience with it whatsoever, but it's basically a group experience is what it is.
And I sat in on it, first of all, to see if it was something I wanted to bring to my congregation, but also because I was going through grief at the same time. And it is mostly for people who are grieving, but it is also a very good resource for those who want to help people who are grieving. That's what I was asking.
That's good. That's good to know. Yes, sir.
Just want to make a question that divorce is just as much an experience of grief as death.
Yes.
It just goes on and on.
Oh, it can be worse, the body doesn't go away.
You're right. The truth shall set you free.
Would it be appropriate for me to share with you the names of 2 books that might be a useful resource?
Please.
One is a tiny little book called Good Grief by a guy named David Westberg. It's smaller than the size of a cigarette pack.
Yes.
But to me, it's been very, very helpful over a period of 40 plus years for myself and for me and for others that I've shared it. The second one is a book that was given to me at the death of my wife just recently by a guy named Sprague, S-P-R-A-G-U-E.
Sprague, okay.
And it has the word grief in the title, but I cannot quote the title to you at this point. It's a very slender book also, but it's larger. It's like about 3/4, like about this size down. And to me, he is a musician, and so he's very much into, I would call him a very sensitive guy.
Billy Sprague? Is that it?
I don't remember. But at any rate, he includes scripture considerations.
Letter to a Grieving Heart? Is that it?
That sounds like it could be it. It's got pictures. It's got references to scripture passages. It's got reference to issues of not even reading anything for a while, but then when you're ready to read, study to consider. So to me, he's a very sensitive guy, and his grief experience was he was engaged to be married.
Yeah, that's Billy Sprague.
And his girlfriend, his fiance, was killed. And so it deals with grief really multidimensionally. And I thought very helpful. I've read the book over 3 or 4